Pranam Maharajji, Pranam. Myself is Brahmachari Mrinmay. Our today Foundation Day celebration is going on. So our revered Maharaj is there. He will be joining shortly. So he asked me to come and welcome you. Thank you for agreeing to deliver this talk. As you know, Maharaj, today is the last talk of the lecture series. We had 19 wonderful webinars every day at 6 p.m. And this is sponsored by the Inter-University Center for Yogic Sciences. So thank you for agreeing to speak to us, speak to the audience today. So just for the knowledge of the audience, revered Maharaj, Swami Suddhidananda ji Maharaj, the Adhyaksha of the Advaita Ashrama of Mayawati, and he's a very learned and erudite monk of our order. So today he will speak on the Yoga Samanvaya, very important subject, very important theme, very important idea of Swami Vivekananda, and the very foundation on which our order is lying. So without much delay, I would request Maharaj to please start his lecture.
Paratmanamekam jagadbijamadyam niriham nirakaram onkar vedyam yato jayate palyate yena vishvam tamisham bhaje liyate yatra vishvam. My namaskars to all of you, dear devotees and friends. I am very thankful to the organizers of this very special webinar series, which has been organized by Ramakrishna Mission Vivekananda Educational and Research Institute, as requested by the Inter-University Center for Yogic Sciences under the University Grants Commission, Government of India. And this webinar series has been organized on the occasion of the International Yoga Day, which falls every year on 21st June. And the main theme of this series has been meeting the challenges of COVID-19 pandemic, the yogic way. So, as it was just now told a little while ago, that in the last 18 days, there has been a series of talks every day on different aspects of yoga. And today is the last day of this program. And I have been invited to give this a valedictory talk. So, though it is a valedictory talk, I have been given a very specific subject to talk upon. And I have been asked to talk on the synthesis of yoga as taught by Swami Vivekananda. When we look into the 6 systems of Indian philosophy, which is known as the Shad Darshanas, the one thing we find is that all of them has got one thing as the main goal, and that main goal is mukti. And the way to attain this mukti is yoga. So, technically speaking, the term yoga, it's a very expansive term. It's a term which covers a very large ground as far as spiritual discipline is concerned. So, this term yoga has been defined as union, the way we get united with the divine. And it also has been understood as samadhi in a very technical sense. But the meaning, in the sense that it is a union with the divine, this is the more popular popularly understood meaning of this term yoga. Essentially, it means that it is a discipline in and through which we are actually speaking in search of a higher consciousness, a higher human consciousness. When we talk about a higher human consciousness, naturally, it connotes or it implies that our present human consciousness is such that we find ourselves to be limited and bound from all sides. And that is one of the main reasons why our life is buffeted by a series of miseries and sufferings, and the human soul is found to be eternally so-called dissatisfied and unfulfilled. And that is the reason why this individual soul is constantly in struggle to find a higher consciousness. So yoga essentially means the individual's search for the higher state of human consciousness. So, in this sense, the yoga means this individual soul's search for that divine entity, realizing which the individual's consciousness becomes radically transformed, irreversibly transformed, and in which all the limitations come to an end, and the person realizes one's own infinite dimension. So that is the great goal of this yoga. So yoga is a way, it's an upaya, it's a sadhan by which he or she, the practitioner, gets united with the divine and puts an end to his or her limited individuality. So in our tradition, we have, in a very general sense, we can say that we have 4 yogas. That is Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Dhyana Yoga or Raja Yoga, and Jnana Yoga. These are the 4 yogas we have seen traditionally existing for a long period of time. Now, if we trace these yogas to its source, we have to go back to the Vedas itself. I'm just tracing this, the concept of yoga and the synthesis of yoga to its source before we come down to Swami Vivekananda. So I will take a few minutes before I finally come down to Vivekananda's idea of synthesis of yoga. So if we go back to the source, let us start from the Vedas itself. Now, what is Vedas? Now, Vedas is, we can say, a collection of the universal scientific spiritual laws and principles. And the main content, the main subject matter of yoga, the central subject matter of Vedas is Brahman. And the essence of the Vedas we get in the Upanishads. And the Upanishads essentially, they deal with the supreme reality called Brahman, the knowledge of Brahman, the knowledge of the supreme reality called Brahman. So, in the Upanishads, which is essentially Jnana centered, which deals with the knowledge of the supreme reality, and which is for that very reason known as Brahma Vidya, because it deals with the supreme reality called Brahman and its complete presentation of this ultimate reality. So it is known as Brahma Vidya. It's the science of Brahman, which is this Upanishad is, which is actually the essence of the Vedas, the end portion of the Vedas. Now, though Upanishads are essentially having this jnana element as its central point, we find in the Upanishads the seeds of all the yogas. But these yogas are in its seed form in the Upanishads. So in the Upanishads itself, we find the seeds of Jnana Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, and Dhyana Yoga. All these yogas are there in their seed form in the Upanishads itself. Now, this very yogas existing in its seed form in the Upanishads. Now, when we come down to Bhagavad Gita, which is the great teaching of Bhagavan Sri Krishna, in the Bhagavad Gita, that which existed in the seed form in the Upanishads, we find those yogas fully developed and presented. So in the Bhagavad Gita, we find the four main yogas: Karma Yoga in a fully systematized manner presented by Bhagavan Krishna. We find Bhakti Yoga, we find Dhyana Yoga or the yoga of meditation, and we also find Jnana Yoga. All the four yogas in its fully developed form presented by Bhagavan Sri Krishna. And one unique point of Bhagavan Sri Krishna's presentation of these four yogas is that in the Gita we find that Bhagavan shows that each of this yoga is independently capable of taking us to the highest realization of that divinity. That higher consciousness which we are talking about, each of these yogas is capable of doing that. Karma Yoga also takes us to that same divine experience. Bhakti Yoga takes us to that very divine experience. Raja Yoga also takes us to the same divine experience. So does Jnana Yoga also take us to the same divine experience. So along with the presentation of these four yogas in its complete, well-developed form, another thing which we find in Bhagavad Gita, that is Sri Krishna reconciles these yogas with one another. We find the reconciliation between jnana and karma in the Bhagavad Gita itself. We find the reconciliation between jnana and bhakti in the Bhagavad Gita itself. For instance, let me just quote a few shlokas from the Bhagavad Gita. In the 5th chapter, reconciling jnana yoga and karma yoga, Bhagavan Krishna very beautifully says that Sankhya Yoga prathak bala pravadanti na pandita ekamapyastita samyak ubhayor vindate phalam. It says, it is only the ignorant people who talk about Jnana Yoga and Karma Yoga to be different. No matter which yoga you resort to, whether Karma Yoga or Jnana Yoga, you will be getting the same result. And that result is the union with the divine. And Bhagwan Bhashikara Sri Shankaracharya very beautifully says, that is the reason why these two paths are said to be one by Bhagwan Krishna. Why? Because they come and converge at the same point. That is that liberation, mukti, which means a completely transformed human consciousness at a very high stage. Similarly, we find Bhagwan Krishna beautifully reconciling the difference between bhakti and jnana. Interestingly, in the 7th chapter, Bhagwan Krishna speaks about 4 types of bhaktas, in which the best bhakta, Bhagwan Krishna says, is the jnani. Jnani is referred to be the best bhakta. And the same idea comes in the 18th chapter, also in the 11th chapter, where Krishna says that how is this ultimate reality to be experienced? Krishna says in the 11th chapter, we have verse, I think, I'm forgetting the number. The verse says that Bhaktya tvananya shakya aham evam vidhorjuna gyatum drashtum cha tatvena praveshtum cha parantapa. How is this highest reality experienced? It is experienced, it is known through Ananya Bhakti. Krishna says, and what is this Ananya Bhakti? This Ananya Bhakti, if you just look into Shankaracharya's commentary there, this Ananya Bhakti is nothing but full of Gyan. Similarly, in the 18th chapter also, Bhagavan Krishna very beautifully says, how is this highest reality experienced? He says, Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yaschasmi tatvatah tato mam tatvato gyatva vishate tadanantaram. Says. So Bhaktya mam abhijanati. How is this ultimate reality? Yavan yaschasmi. That is this ultimate reality with all its limiting adjuncts, with the upadhis, and also without the upadhis. That is this Brahman which is sopadhik as well as Brahman which is nirupadhik. This sopadhik, nirupadhik Brahman in its totality, how is it experienced? Through bhakti. And Bhagwan Bhashikara beautifully comments there. What is this bhakti? It is Jnana Lakshana bhakti. A bhakti which is actually non-different from Jnana. So at the higher level, we find the differentiation between bhakti and jnana is dissolved. Para bhakti and para jnana, they are the same thing, which is also told by Sri Ramakrishna. So in this way, we find in the Bhagavad Gita itself, the differences between these yogas, they have been shown to be actually only at the lower levels, but not at the higher level. At the highest reaches, the differentiation actually blurs and vanishes. And as I said, that Bhagwan Krishna beautifully presents these four yogas in its full-fledged form in the Bhagavad Gita. And also, he reconciles all these yogas. And then he also does one thing, that is, he presents the idea of yoga samuchaya, or the synthesis of the yogas in the Bhagavad Gita itself. And one of the verses, which actually, there are several verses in the Bhagavad Gita where we find Bhagwan Krishna very beautifully prescribing that one should practice all these yogas together to move towards the highest reality. So one such verse which comes to my mind is the last verse of the 11th chapter, the 55th verse of the 11th chapter, which says, where Bhagwan Krishna says, Mat karma krit, mat paramo, mat bhakta sangavarjita, nirvaira sarvabhuteshu, yah samameti pandava. So it's a beautiful verse which actually means, to put it in a very simple English language, Bhagwan Krishna says, Yah mat karma krit, one who works for me. That means one who practices karma yoga. Then mat paramo, yah mat paramo, who considers me to be the supreme reality. Then he says, Yah mad bhaktaha, one who is my devotee or connected to me through extreme devotion. So this refers to the practice of bhakti yoga. Then he says, Yah sangha varjitaha, one is devoid of sangha. This quality of being nissanga, this is essentially a quality of the jnana marga, because Atman alone is, in its true nature, asanga. In the Upanishads, we find in several places it is being presented as asango hi ayam purushaha. This Atman is asanga by its very nature. So that refers to the path of jnana. In this way, Krishna says in that 11th verse, 11th chapter's last verse, that by the practice of karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and jnana yoga, in which dhyana yoga is very much implied. In this way, by practicing all the four yogas together, yes, samameti pandava, that person, this practitioner, experiences me, he attains to my nature. So referring to or commenting upon this last verse of Bhagavad Gita, in this last verse of 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Bhagwan Bhashikara very beautifully says, he says that this is the very essence of the whole of the Gita Shastra. Aduna sarvasya Gita Shastrasya sarabhuta artho anushtheyatvena uchyate. Bhagwan Bhashikara says very beautifully. He says that now the sara of the entire Gita Shastra, Aduna sarvasya Gita Shastrasya, this entire Gita Shastra, if you take, What is its sarabhutartha? The essence. That essence is being presented. And that essence is being presented here. For what? Anushteyatvena uchate. It is being presented for the sake of practice. So, what is being prescribed here to be practiced? That is yoga samuchaya. That is synthesis of the four yogas, where Krishna speaks of practicing karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, dhyana yoga, all of that together, and thus attain that supreme realization. So, in this way, we find in the Bhagavad Gita itself this great yoga samuchaya, or the synthesis of yoga, has been presented to us. And when we talk about this yoga samuchaya, there is one thing that we have to keep in mind, and that is very important. And that is every yoga, if you just look into it very carefully, when we study all these different yogas, we find that there are two levels in every yoga. For example, every yoga has got two levels, a higher level and a lower level. For example, it will become clear that in the Jnana Yoga, we have Paravidya and Aparavidya. Or we can put it in this way, technically speaking, we have Paroksha Gyan and Aparoksha Gyan. These are two levels of Gyan. So Paroksha Gyan is the lower level and Aparoksha Gyan is the higher level. Similarly, when we look into the Bhakti, in the Bhakti also we have Para Bhakti and Apara Bhakti. Para Bhakti is the higher level of Bhakti and Apara Bhakti is the lower level of Bhakti. It is also known as Mukhya Bhakti and Gauni Bhakti or Vaidhi Bhakti. These are the terms. Similarly, when we look into the practice of dhyana, the practice of meditation, Raja Yoga, there also we have two levels. One is Antaranga and Bahiranga. This Antaranga is the higher level, and Bahiranga is that practice which is still on the lower levels of that particular yoga. The same thing we can see in karma also. Karma, when it is practiced, karma yoga, when it is practiced at the lower level, it will have the ingredients of a little bit of selfishness, little bit of attachment, etc. But the same karma yoga, when it reaches its higher levels, it becomes absolutely devoid of all these attachments and desires. It becomes completely desireless. In this way, we can see that all these yogas, in them, we have two levels, higher and lower levels. Now, we should note one point, this is very important, that the practice of all these yogas, by the practice of all these four yogas, all these four yogas, they come and meet at one point, at the higher levels. That one common point, the common, I should say, a vestibule, or a common room, or a common state of mind, they all come and merge there. And that common vestibule or the common room where they all come and converge, that is that state of mind where the human consciousness stands irreversibly and radically transformed. This is the goal of all the yogas. It is a search for a higher consciousness, the emergence of a higher consciousness. So all these yogas which look to be different and distinctive at the lower levels, they come and converge at one point where their distinctiveness comes to an end. So we need to understand one point, that when we talk about yoga samuchaya or the synthesis of yogas, it is always at the lower level and never at the higher level. To talk about yoga samuchaya or synthesis of yoga at the higher level is truly speaking meaningless, because the very distinctiveness of these yogas as existing separated from each other is lost. So interestingly, you will find that this when we talk about yoga samuchaya, it is always at the lower levels of the yogas and never at the higher level. Now, this we find in the Bhagavad Gita. That is why in the Bhagavad Gita, at the higher levels, when the Karma Yoga and Sankhya Yoga, they come and meet at a point at a higher level, which is that higher state of human consciousness where liberation is experienced. No more samuchaya is possible there. Same thing with para bhakti and para gyan. At the higher levels, the difference between bhakti and gyan is lost. So when we talk about the samuchaya, it is always at the lower planes of yoga. Interestingly, we have to again understand this. Even the great Bhashyakaras, Bhagwan Sri Shankaracharya and Sri Ramanujacharya, the two great spiritual masters of medieval India, even they rejected karma, they rejected the samuchaya only at the higher levels. They have rejected yoga samuchaya only at the higher levels. But interestingly, Shankaracharya positively prescribes the samuchaya or the synthesis of all the yogas at the lower levels. Equally does Ramanujacharya prescribe the synthesis of yogas at the lower levels. Shankaracharya would say that at the paroksha jnana level, along with that jnana practice, one should practice upasana, bhakti, karma yoga, and also meditation. All of those things have to be practiced together. Throughout his bhashyas, we can see this idea going on. Only at the higher reaches, the samuchaya is rejected. Similarly, Ramanujacharya would positively prescribe samuchaya of the yogas, the synthesis of yogas at lower level. He would say that along with the practice of bhakti, one should practice jnana yoga, karma yoga, and meditation also, so that this para bhakti is awakened. So this samuchaya, yoga samuchaya, the synthesis of the yogas, we find it in the Bhagavad Gita. We find it also in the great Bhashyakaras also, because this yoga samuchaya is something which happens only at the lower levels and not at the higher levels. Now let us come down to Swami Vivekananda. Now, did Swami Vivekananda in any way deviate from these great teachers, great masters like Krishna and Shankaracharya and Ramanujacharya? No. Swami Vivekananda's idea of the synthesis of the four yogas is just the same as told by Bhagwan Krishna and by the great masters of the past. The only thing is that Sri Krishna and Shankaracharya and Ramanujacharya, they are separated by a vast time span compared to Swami Vivekananda's time. And in between, we find that this idea of yoga samuchaya or synthesis of yoga was somewhere lost. It was forgotten. It is Swami Vivekananda who once again revives it and represents it in a fresh manner. And he breathes such new freshness into this idea that it almost looks like something new. The one thing we need to very beautifully understand about Swami Vivekananda's genius, about which Sister Nivedita very clearly talks. Sister Nivedita says, what was the speciality of Swami Vivekananda's teachings? In the Hindu spiritual thought system, which is a very vast corpus of spiritual ideas, these ideas were lying scattered and disorganized. The unique contribution of Swami Vivekananda in this respect has been, according to Nivedita, two things. She says Vivekananda's beauty lies in the fact that he organized and coordinated the scattered spiritual ideas of the Hindu Sanatana Dharma. So two things happen: organizing and consolidating of the scattered spiritual ideas of the Hindu Sanatana Dharma and presenting it to the present times in the most authoritative fashion. Utterances which had a tremendous authority behind him. This was the unique contribution of Swami Vivekananda as far as presentation of these ideas are concerned. So, even regarding this Yoga Samuchaya, we find Swami Vivekananda revives it, brings it back. And the beauty is that these ideas, which otherwise would have remained scattered somewhere in Bhagavad Gita and somewhere in the commentaries of the Bhashyakara, he takes them all and in one single beautiful paragraph, he presents it with such precision and such sharpness that it really it makes us wonder that only a genius like Vivekananda can do that. So what is that beautiful utterance that we find in Swami Vivekananda? You all know, right in the beginning of the Raja Yoga, Swami Vivekananda says that each soul is potentially divine. The goal is to manifest this divinity by controlling nature, external and internal. He says, do this by work, by worship, by psychic control or philosophy, by one or more or all of them, and be free. This is the whole of religion. Just imagine who could have formulated this kind of a consolidated and well organized idea other than Vivekananda. He takes the whole range of the traditional thought, this thought of the ultimate goal of human life being the freedom, mukti, and the different ways to attain that mukti are the different yogas which we have in our tradition. And the combination and the synthesis of this yoga, which is there in the Gita and also in the Bhashyakaras, he takes all those scattered ideas and presents it in this one small paragraph of a few lines, which otherwise we would not have access to. Perhaps most of the common people would not have access to it. So in this one beautiful paragraph, Swami Vivekananda sums up the entire story of the spiritual realm where the ultimate goal is presented as freedom. And how do we attain this freedom? By either work, that is karma yoga, or worship, that is bhakti yoga, or psychic control, that is dhyana yoga or raja yoga, and or philosophy, that is jnana yoga. By one or more. You can do it you can resort to any one of the yogas, or you can combine them, one or more, or all of them, and be free. This is the genius of Swami Vivekananda, where he takes the whole ideas of the past and consolidates it, so organizes it, and presents to our own time, our own people, with such freshness, breathing such freshness into it, that it almost looks new and fresh. And that is the beauty of Swami Vivekananda's presentation of the four yogas and the synthesis of the four yogas. Now, the next question comes, why do we prescribe the synthesis of the four yogas? What is the logic behind it? In this case, Swami Vivekananda gives wonderful answers. Wonderful answers. Again, I want to repeat one more point, that even in Swami Vivekananda's the synthesis of the four yogas, the synthesis is only at the lower planes. At the higher reaches, the synthesis becomes meaningless. The fusion of the four yogas is only in the beginning of the spiritual life. When we grow up in spiritual life, using all these four yogas together, we come to a point where the differentiation between these four yogas come to an end. So this fusion is only at the lower levels. This we need to understand very clearly. Now, as I said, what is the reason why these four yogas have to be synthesized or they have to be practiced together? What is the logic behind that? Swami Vivekananda gives a very beautiful answer. He says that we have to practice all these four yogas together for the simple reason that this conduces to the complete development of the human personality. Now, Swami Vivekananda's synthesis of the four yogas, it is more psychological than philosophical. Now, what do I mean by saying that it is more psychological? The reason is that Swami Vivekananda says that this human being, every human being has got three main faculties: the faculties of thinking, the faculty of feeling, and the faculty of willing. Thinking, feeling, and willing. These three faculties, all of us, every human being has got it. And each faculty is connected with one yoga. This thinking faculty is connected to Jnana Yoga. This feeling faculty is connected to Bhakti Yoga. And this willing faculty is connected to Karma Yoga as well as Dhyana Yoga or Raja Yoga. Now, using any one of these faculties, a human being can reach the goal of human life, that is, the attainment of a higher consciousness, completely transformed human consciousness, where he or she is liberated for once and for all times. So by using one faculty, one can reach there. But Swami Vivekananda says, why not use all the faculties? When we use only one faculty, we become one-sided. Our development remains one-sided and partial. Why not use all the faculties together and move towards the highest reality? That is the logic. And another point which is more important is that suppose we have to reach a particular target. And when we have, for example, if we have three means to be adopted, 3 or 4 means to be adopted, or 3 or 4 resources which we can use to reach that target. So why use only one resource? Why not combine all the available resources? Why not combine all the available means? And by the combined force, we may call that when you combine all these different yogas, we can say that it produces a kind of a synergy which expedites our progress towards the ultimate reality. It makes this process of reaching that goal speedier and easier also when we use all the available resources with us. So that is the simple logic behind utilizing all the available resources, the resources of the thinking, the resource of feeling, the resource of willing, using all of them together at the lower level and creating a synergy with the help of which the soul, he or she, the practitioner, in a very speedy fashion, he moved towards the experience of that higher consciousness. So this is the logic which Swami Vivekananda says that there's reason why we have to practice the synthesis of the yoga. Another very interesting manner in which Swami Vivekananda puts this idea is he says that it is the combination of head, heart, and hands. This head is related to Jnana Yoga, and this heart is related to Bhakti Yoga and also to Dhyana Yoga and Raja Yoga, we can say, and the hand is related to Karma Yoga. So why should we progress towards that reality using only the head? Why can't we combine this head with the heart and also with the hand? When we have this kind of a combination, then the person develops into an integral human being. An integral human mind comes into the picture. And this is what Swami Vivekananda holds as the ideal before us, an ideal man or an ideal woman who has developed this kind of an integral personality where all the faculties of the human system has been equally developed and the person doesn't become one-sided. So this is the logic of synthesizing all the 4 yogas together. Now, another point which reason why this yoga has to be practiced together is that when we practice one particular yoga alone, as it was mentioned before, we may become one-sided, we may become fanatic, dogmatic about that, and we may be developing some kind of a hatred for other paths. And this is a big danger. And another reason why we should practice the fusion of all the yogas is that if we use only one faculty, for example, if we only take up the practice of Jnana Yoga without any reference to Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga and the yoga of meditation, there is every chance that this Jnana practice, it may turn out to be nothing but a dry, sterile kind of intellectualism. Similarly with Bhakti Yoga also, when Bhakti Yoga is exclusively practiced, sometimes it may so happen, with most of the cases, that without having the backing of proper jnana and proper dhyana and proper karma yoga, without the backing of these things, this exclusive practice of Bhakti Yoga may turn out to be nothing but a very, very superficial sentimentalism. Swami Vivekananda says that. Similarly, the practice of Dhyana Yoga or Raja Yoga, without reference to Jnana and Bhakti and Karma, when it is exclusively practiced, there is a danger of this practice of meditation turning out to be something like a dull, dead, stupor state of mind, the development of a state of mind which may be like something dull, dead, and stupor kind of a thing. So that is the danger of practicing sometimes Dhyana Yoga without having Bhakti and Jnana element in it. And finally, if you practice Karma Yoga exclusively, there is always a danger that this karma, instead of becoming a spiritual practice, there is every danger that it may turn out to be something very mundane. So these are the dangers of practicing these yogas exclusively, to the exclusion of all the other yogas. So in order to safeguard ourselves from these dangers and pitfalls, it is always advisable for us to combine all the yogas together so that we have a very healthy and wholesome development of the human personality. And with the combined force which is generated by employing all the faculties of the human psychophysical system, we speedily move towards the emergence of a higher consciousness, where we rediscover ourselves in a new manner. Now, one more reason we can give, which comes to my mind, is that in the modern times, truly speaking, the way the times have changed, the society has changed, the whole world has become such a small place, and with the increase in the human population, the chances of practicing one particular yoga to the exclusion of all others, truly speaking, such an idea is not very practicable, because we are living in a times where the action or karma is an inseparable part of everybody's life, even the lives of the sannyasis. Today, the situation is such that we are living inside the society, and we are in the midst of this a very hectic activity which is going on, and we have to practice spirituality in the midst of this. So in this situation, to think of practicing one particular yoga exclusively to the exclusion of all others is not a very practical proposition, truly speaking. And that's why it is advisable that in the present times, in the midst of this active and hectic life, what we need to do is we need to use all these faculties together in the active field. And with this combined force, we have to move ahead towards the attainment of our spiritual goal. Now, the next question that comes is, now we have spoken about this Yoga Samuchaya. In our tradition, we have come down to Swami Vivekananda's ideas of Yoga Samuchaya and why it should be practiced. One of the main reasons is the development of a wholesome human personality. Yes, in this regard, one point again, I'm reminded. Once, one disciple of Swami Vivekananda asked him a question that, Swamiji, how to develop a complete human personality? Interestingly, though Swami Vivekananda has prescribed this Yoga Samuchaya, synthesis of the yogas, we don't find Swami Vivekananda giving detailed description of how to practice it. And interestingly, when Swami Vivekananda was asked this question by one of the disciples, Swami Vivekananda answered, he said that by living in the company of a person who has developed his personality in this manner. He didn't give the details of it, how to practice the Yoga Samuchaya or the synthesis of the four yogas in life, but he said the best way to practice is to live in the company of a person who has developed his or her personality in this manner. And obviously, Swami Vivekananda had lived with a person who was the very embodiment of Yoga Samuchaya, that is Sri Ramakrishna, his Gurudev, in whom we find all these yogas combinedly working in every moment of that person's life. So Swami Vivekananda had seen a living, vibrant, a dynamic demonstration of this synthesis of the four yogas in Sri Ramakrishna, and Swami Vivekananda presents that as the ideal for the entire human race. So this is the answer which Swami Vivekananda gave as to how we have to practice Yoga Samuchaya. He said we have to live with someone who has developed his or her personality in this manner. But it would be rather very difficult to find someone like this. But that is the reason why we will have to find out our own ways to practice this Yoga Samuchaya or synthesis of the four yogas. And how do we do that? That is the next question. So usually we find that all the spiritual aspirants who fully accept this idea of combining the four yogas in the initial stages of their spiritual life, how do they practice it? Usually we find, and which is very commonly seen everywhere, like for example, in the 24 hours daytime, we practice these different yogas at different points of time. For example, early in the morning, we get up and we sit down for meditation. So that becomes Dhyana Yoga. And towards the end of the meditation, we spend some time in prayer, in some devotional exercises. We may do some puja. So that becomes Bhakti Yoga. Then after that, when we get down to the work field, we begin to practice Karma Yoga. And perhaps in the evening, we sit down to read some Upanishads or some Vedantic text, some Prakarana Granthas, and we try to consciously do some Vedanta Vichar. So that becomes Jnana Yoga. In this way, we find usually spiritual aspirants, they combine these four yogas every day at different points of time, practicing it one after the other. This is one way of understanding the synthesis of the yoga in our day-to-day life. But this is, again, we can say that it is only in the initial stages. But as we progress in spiritual life, it takes a different form or a higher form. For example, we can also think about synthesizing these four yogas in a different manner. For example, this body-mind complex. This body-mind complex is made up of 5 koshas. According to Vedanta, it has got 5 layers. We have the Annamaya kosha, the gross physical body. Inside that, more subtler than the gross, we have the Pranamaya kosha. Subtler than that, we have the Manomaya kosha. Subtler than that, we have the Vijnanamaya kosha. And even subtler than that, we have the Anandamaya kosha. So these are the 5 layers which together constitute this human psychophysical system. And each of these layers can be associated with one particular yoga. For example, this Annamaya kosha and Pranamaya kosha can be connected with Karma Yoga. And this Manomaya kosha can be connected with Raja Yoga. And Vijnanamaya and Anandamaya koshas can be connected with the practice of Bhakti Yoga and Jnana Yoga. No, as all these 5 koshas, the 5 layers of this human personality, it is constantly active. When we learn to connect these koshas with these different yogas, in that way also, all the yogas will be actively practiced in our day-to-day life, every moment, because these 5 layers of human personality, they are constantly active. And when we associate these yogas consciously with these layers, we will see that all these yogas also will become consciously functioning in our system. And in this way, also, the Yoga Samuchaya, or the fusion of all the yogas in our life, can be accomplished. This also can be done. Now, we come to the most important point. That is the unique contribution of Swami Vivekananda, a genius of Swami Vivekananda. That is this idea of Yoga Samuchaya. Not only Yoga Samuchaya, the entire expansive indescribable, expansive range of spiritual ideas, as I said, which were scattered, perhaps disorganized, lying scattered here and there in the past, in the traditions, in the great masters, in the teachings of the past, in the Upanishads, in the Vedas, in the Gita, in the Bhashyakaras, all of them, the great tradition which we have. Swami Vivekananda takes the whole expanse of the spiritual thought of the Hindu thought system, spiritual thought system, and presents this entire range of spiritual thought in the form of one small emblem, one small image. What a beautiful contribution it is. And that image is the one which you will see here on my left side. I would like to just describe it. It's a beautiful image. This image was, was drawn by Swami Vivekananda himself. Now, this is a symbol. Just like we have a wonderful symbol to symbolize the ultimate reality called Brahman, we have this the Akshara Brahman, which is known as Pranava, Om, Ekaksharam, the one-lettered symbol, Om, which tells the entire idea of the supreme reality through one Akshara. So a symbol is a thing which encapsulates within itself a tremendous idea behind it. Similarly, Swami Vivekananda takes the entire range of the Hindu spiritual thought system and squeezes it into one simple image. This is the genius of Swami Vivekananda, and only a great spiritual master like Swami Vivekananda can do this. It's a unique contribution of Swami Vivekananda. So Swami Vivekananda had drawn this symbol in which you can see that you will find there is a swan here. The swan represents the Paramatman, or that supreme reality called Brahman, or that higher state of transformed human consciousness which we are talking about, which we refer to in our talk here. That is the goal of human life. We are all in search of a higher consciousness. The higher consciousness where we come directly in touch with that supreme reality, where every practitioner, he or she, rediscovers herself or himself in a new way. So that is what is symbolized by this swan. Then we have, just beneath the swan, we have a lotus. The lotus symbolizes the Bhakti Yoga. And we have the wavy waters here. And the wavy waters, it symbolizes Karma Yoga. And we have a rising sun here, which symbolizes Jnana Yoga. And we have an encircling serpent, a serpent here, which symbolizes Raja Yoga. Now just imagine what Swami Vivekananda has done. In the beginning of the talk, I said all the Shad Darshanas have got one goal, that is Mukti. That is the central idea of Vedic Sanatana Dharma. And yoga is the way to attain that Mukti. So he takes this entire expanse of the spiritual thought available in the Vedic Sanatana Dharma and puts it in the form of this image. So this Mukti is here represented by the swan, and how to attain it? By synthesizing all the four yogas, the Karma Yoga, the Bhakti Yoga, the Jnana Yoga, and Raja Yoga. So this symbol, actually speaking, is one of the genius which we don't find anyone else having done in our tradition. And Swami Vivekananda holds this to be the ideal for the future humankind, individually as well as collectively. Individually, as I said, the development of the fully integrated human personality is the ideal human being of the future. And collectively, this is the future philosophy for the entire humankind. That is, the entire human civilization has to progress in this ideology of using all the available faculties of the human system and developing the human personality individually as well as collectively. So Swami Vivekananda has spoken about giving a new civilization to the world. If I remember in the in his one of his talks in England, perhaps in 1896, Swami Vivekananda says that we have to give a new civilization to the world. What is this new civilization that Swami Vivekananda is referring to? That new civilization will be of this kind, which will be free from all dogmatism, which will be free from all one-sidedness, where every human being will be developed and fully molded in such a way that he openly accepts all the different paths which lead to the experience of the higher consciousness. So this Swami Vivekananda presents as the future of humankind, individually as well as collectively. So one more point I would just like to refer to here in this respect, that is when we talk about the relevance of this yoga samuchaya, the synthesis of the four yogas, we should remember that nothing is more practical than resorting to this practice of yoga. See, we are having this webinar series on the occasion of the International Yoga Day. The very term yoga is understood by people in different senses. We should understand, as I said in the beginning, yoga essentially is the human search for a higher consciousness where the practitioner, he or she, rediscovers himself or herself in a new way, where all limitations come to an end and he or she finds herself or himself completely liberated. So, what can be more relevant than this? One of the beautiful definitions of yoga, a little negative kind of a definition which we find in the Bhagavad Gita. Usually yoga is defined as samatvam and as union, as samadhi. These are the technical definitions. But Krishna gives a very negative kind of a definition, which is actually speaking more relatable for most of us. Krishna says, what is yoga? Dukkha sanyoga viyoga, he says, is yoga. See, presently we are all experiencing dukkha sanyoga. That is our union with dukkha. So yoga is that which disconnects our connection with dukkha and connects us with sukha. So the simple question is that which human being, anywhere, at any point of time, would want to be connected with dukkha? We all want to be disconnected with dukkha and connected with that sukham which is permanent. So yoga is that way of life, a disciplined way of life, a search for a higher consciousness in and through which we, over a period of time, when we practice it, we come to a stage where we get completely disconnected with dukkha and connected with a permanent sukham. So this is the importance of understanding yoga as a way of life, which is the most wisest thing to be done at the human plane of existence, and which Swami Vivekananda says when we talk about yoga, we need to synthesize, or we need to practice all the yogas together. That is the best method. If somebody can do it individually, well and fine. But the best method will be by practicing yoga samuchaya and move towards the experience of higher consciousness. I thank the organizers for having given me this opportunity today to speak in this valedictory session. And I hope definitely that this series of talks might have immensely helped all the listeners all over the world, whoever have watched these very informative and inspiring talks. And I'm sure that it will help the people to think seriously about adopting this yogic way of life. Thank you so much. Namaskar.
Thank you, Swami Suddhidananda, for the excellent presentation. There are some questions which will be read out by this brahmachari. You can take a couple of questions here.
The first question is from Shubhrendu Gangopadhyay. Oh, it's not a question, it's more of a comment. What a wonderful finale to the series of webinars during the last 15 days. We have to move up along the path of psychic evolution and develop our consciousness by a systematic synthesis of all the four yogas. And the talk this evening is a pointer to that. So, that's a comment. So next is a question. Pranam Swamiji, it's from Parthadhar. I think the word samuchaya is very disturbing since it has been very categorically refuted by the Advaita Vedanta. Swami Vivekananda never uttered the word samuchaya, rather it's samanvaya, synthesizing. The samuchaya stands for even after getting pratisthita in jnana, one needs to continue karma to maintain the moksha status. So I feel samuchaya word needs to be avoided in this regard. Please let me know your opinion.
Anyway, see, the word we use, it really doesn't matter. It is not really the main point here. As I told, the one thing that we need to understand is this synthesis which we are discussing here. It is something which takes place only at the lower level. Whether you use the word samuchaya or samanvaya, technically speaking, the word samuchaya is more appropriate. But anyway, that should not be a point of contention or a debate here, because samuchaya in samanvaya, if you just go by the dictionary meaning, usually the word used for samanvaya, English word used for samanvaya is harmony. And the word for synthesis is actually samuchaya. Synthesis and harmony, there is a slight difference between these two terms in the sense that in the harmony, there are different things which are brought together in such a way that they remain non-conflicting. They remain side by side. This is what we usually understand by the term samanvaya or say harmony. But when we talk about synthesis, there is slight difference in the sense that in the synthesis we have fusion of the so-called different things. They are fused together to create, as I said in my talk before, to create a higher power, a synergy, through which the soul is, I can say, catapulted into a higher plane of consciousness. So there is a slight difference between these two words of harmony and synthesis. So whatever it is, I would say that whatever terms we may use, but let us try to catch the main point, the central point, and let us not make this a matter of debate. The thing is that we need to fuse these faculties which we have in such a way that the combined force which is created by this fusion, that speedily makes us evolve towards the attainment of that goal. And this idea is consistently present in all the great masters of the past, no matter in which sense we use these terms. That is truly speaking secondary to our debate. Let us just catch the main point. I think that will make this point more clear.
There is a related question from Dikshant Roy Chaudhary. Synthesis may be done between things which are different from each other. What creates this fine line of distinction between different yogas in lower plane, and what removes this distinction on reaching the higher plane?
See, at the higher plane, now see, this is a matter of experience, which is very difficult to put in words. Now, what happens at the higher plane, it is a matter of experience. But at the lower plane, we all know that we have these faculties with certain traits and characteristics. Like we have a thinking faculty, we have our feeling faculty, we have our willing faculty. They are all distinct at the lower planes. But when these are fused together, or when they are engaged at the same time, the power which is generated with this kind of fusion, it takes us to the emergence of a higher consciousness now, which is completely the domain of experience, which cannot be put in words like that. But one characteristic which we find in the higher state of consciousness is the complete disappearance of the distinctiveness of these different faculties. That what remains is something which is a unit whole, where these differences are no more categorically present. Now, this is a matter of experience which which cannot be brought down to the level of vocabulary and discussion.
So another question from Dr. Biplav Burman. Actually, there are 3 questions. The first 2 are related. Without Guru, how can a general person select this combination of 4 yogas? And is there a difference in practice between tamasic, rajasic, and sattvic levels of people?
See, as stated by Swami Vivekananda himself, when Swami Vivekananda was asked this question that how shall we practice this 4 yogas, the synthesis of the 4 yogas, Swami Vivekananda has not given a detailed description about how to practice it, but he says that the best thing is to live with a person who has practiced this, who is a living embodiment of that. So definitely it is going to be a difficult thing for us to find such a person, but undoubtedly we need guidance in this regard. So definitely we need a guru in this. There is absolutely no true opinion about it. And we can get a lot of insights into the practice of the synthesis of the yogas from a person who is already on this path. So definitely we have to resort to such persons. And in our tradition, one thing is very clear, that when there is a hunger, a spiritual hunger, and this sincere desire to practice these things, then the person who can guide that person will also appear at the right time. This is a divine arrangement, which is certain, which has been stated by all the great masters. It is a divine mechanism. When there is a requirement, a sincere requirement to rise high in spiritual pursuit, to help that soul rise high, the right kind of a person who can help that person also appears. We should remember one thing. It's a good question that you have raised, that this yoga, it is not one-sided process. It is actually speaking a two-sided process. We should remember. It is the struggle of the human soul to ascend. At the same time, it is also a process in which the divine begins to unfold. So it's a dual process going on. That is, one is the soul trying to rise up, and at the same time, the sincerity of the soul to rise up forces the divine to unfold to that very extent. So it's a twofold kind of a dynamic event that is going on. I can give one example. Just imagine if there is a plant. This plant is there. This plant is trying to rise up, and the sun is sending its rays down. So it's a twofold process. The plant wants to grow towards the sunlight, and the sunlight is coming down and helping the plant to grow up. This is just a very gross example, just to put forth the idea that the spiritual struggle to rise to the level of a higher consciousness, it is not a one-sided process. It is a two-sided process in which the divine is also equally involved, in the sense that it begins to unfold itself and help the ascent of the soul higher and higher. So the main reason why I'm saying this is that when the soul tries to rise high, the person who can help him also comes at the right time. So this great principle has to be kept in mind when we talk about this great process of yoga.
One more question from the same person. How can we feel the Pranamaya Kosha is our existence? We can understand Annamaya and Manomaya Kosha, but not Pranamaya Kosha.
How can this is very obvious actually. How can we even imagine about Annamaya Kosha without Pranamaya Kosha? Shankaracharya, in his bhashyas, he describes this Pranamaya Kosha as Anta Upashtambhaka. The word used is Anta Upashtambhaka. Upashtambhaka means something which is like a pillar, which supports from within. Just imagine, will this gross body, will it be even able to stand without the prana behind it? Now see, all the dynamism which we are seeing in this body-mind complex. I am talking, my hands are shaking, my eyes are functioning, and everything. I am talking, Everything is becoming possible by this great animating force, which is just behind it, and which is in the language of Bhagwan Bhashakara, antar upashtambhaka, to something which supports this gross body from within. So I don't think so that we need any other proof of understanding Pranamaya Kosha. Just imagine if this Pranamaya Kosha is not there, this gross body will just drop down like a dry leaf. We have seen this dry leaf, how it falls down from a tree. This gross body will be just collapsing down in the absence of this prana. So that what more proof do we need about the existence of the Pranamaya Kosha? The very fact that you are asking this question proves that your prana is very vitally working in your gross body.
Thank you, Maharaj. There is one, as of now, there is one final question from Dr. Muttaya. How do we connect the synthesis of 4 yogas into the present day educational curriculum?
Now, this is a very important question. I have always been, wherever I get a chance, I always say that our present education system is a very grossly flawed education system. Seen from the standpoint of our tradition, what existed in India for ages, compared to that, today what we have in our education system, it is seriously flawed. Now, we are talking about introducing certain elements into our education system. That is fine. If you let us go back to Swami Vivekananda's idea, Swami Vivekananda has so strongly emphasized this point that we have to have our educational system on our national lines. And when he speaks about the education system on national lines, we should understand what he's referring to. He is referring to the Gurukula system. Now, how are we going to go back to our Gurukula system? It's a very big question mark, seeing the present scenario and the way we have moved ahead in this wrong direction. I would say this is wrong direction for only one reason. That reason is absolute absence of the spiritual education in this education system. In that sense, I would definitely say this has been the biggest blunder in the Indian history, where the Indian education system, which has always been essentially spiritual, with spirituality as the core and to which all the empirical sciences were added. In our Gurukula system, the essential education has always been spiritual. And to that, yes, we had very well developed empirical sciences, but not without the spiritual core. And with the adoption of the so-called the European education system into this country, since then, systematically we have been completely disconnected from our spiritual roots. And that is the reason today, in 2021, when we are talking about spirituality, our younger generation have absolutely no clue about it. Just imagine, this land is the land of the birthplace of spirituality, where spirituality runs in our blood. In this land, today we have the present generation of young boys and girls who have absolutely no clue about what the spiritual dimension is. One of the main reasons is our flawed education system, in which there is no place for spirituality at all. We are somehow trying to include a little bit here and a little bit there. No, I personally believe that we need a radical change. And this is going to be a very tough job. But I believe when Swami Vivekananda has spoken about it emphatically, definitely we will begin to move in this direction. And in course of time, maybe not in our lifetime, but definitely India collectively, the Indian consciousness, the Indian soul, that soul is awakening. It is awake, it is not dead. So it will rise and it will bring about the needed changes in future, and we will definitely bring back this spiritual science as the very core of our education. And our education system should be the standard for the entire world. Why should the Western world be standard for education system? India's education system, with spirituality as the core, should become a standard and the benchmark for the entire humanity to follow. Why not look at the Indian education system, the future Indian education system in this light, which was what Swami Vivekananda had visualized. So we have, I think, a long way to go. So truly speaking, I don't have a straight answer to your question, how are we going to introduce these 4 yogas in our spiritual curriculum? Yes, we can try to introduce some books of Swami Vivekananda here and there, but definitely we need a radical change, a root and branch change, as Swami Vivekananda has spoken about. But that may take a longer time, and we all have to put our minds into it and think in that direction.
So we come to the end of this lecture as well as the whole series. Swami Suddhidananda-ji, as we call in the puja with the Purnahuti. So he gave the valedictory talk. We began on 16th of June, and non-stop every day we had talks from 6 to 7 followed by questions. And many people followed every day, and there were some dropouts naturally. So for 19 continuous days, we have been discussing yoga from the point of ancient Indian Upanishadic and Gita perspectives, Yoga Sutra perspective, Bhakti Yoga perspective, and also the neurophysiological and neuroscientific perspective and the consciousness studies which is happening in the field of neuroscience and what changes meditation and other practices bring about in the brain and so on, imaging. So different points of view, this question was tackled, the idea of yoga and consciousness. So we are so thankful to Swami Suddhidananda-ji, Adhyaksha of the Advaita Ashrama Mayawati. Swami Vivekananda himself started it for doing this Purnahuti. So I thank all the participants who have been very patiently listening, interacting, asking questions. Hope somewhere somebody has been ignited, and this seed of an elevated thought, as Swami Vivekananda said, will never die out. He famously said, if a holy man lives in a cave and sings 5 holy thoughts, these thoughts will penetrate the walls of the caves and fasten on to some heart and work out there. Such is the power of thought. So we thank everybody. So we'll end with the Purnahuti mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnad Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. Shri Ram Krishna Namastu.